The Slack message arrived at 4:47 on a Friday afternoon. I know the exact time because I had just saved the company $220,000 that morning, and the notification sound came while I was still eating the celebratory sandwich I had bought myself at lunch. The message was from Connor Vale, VP of Technology Operations, who had been at the company for 11 weeks and wore the same Patagonia vest 4 days out of 5, like it was a uniform rather than a personality. It said, "Hey Margot, tough conversation, but we're moving in a different direction with the systems team. Today will be your last day. HR will send the formal stuff. Thanks for everything." No phone call. No meeting. No tough conversation. That was actually a conversation. Just a Slack notification, a sandwich, and the quiet understanding that Connor had just made the most expensive mistake in Paravex Solutions' 9-year history. I read the message once. Then I read it again. Then I picked up my sandwich, took a very deliberate bite, and typed back, "Understood. I'll complete standard offboarding per policy." If you enjoy stories about men who believe automation is just fancy clicking and then discover it isn't, like and subscribe. This one takes about 72 hours to get beautiful. My name was Margot Ellison. I was 46 when Paravex Solutions let me go by chat message on a Friday in March. Paravex was a mid-sized B2B SaaS company based in Austin, Texas, that sold workflow management software to professional services firms, law practices, accounting groups, engineering consultancies, mid-sized healthcare administration shops. We had about 340 employees, $48 million in annual recurring revenue, and the particular energy of a company that had grown faster than its bones. My title was Senior Director of Systems Architecture and Automation. I had been there for 9 years, which meant I had been there before the current CTO, before the current CFO, before the sales leadership, and obviously before Connor Vale, who had not existed professionally when I joined. I got hired to build internal systems. What I actually built was the operational nervous system of the entire company. It was called the Paravex Operational Engine. PO. My team called it the engine. Finance called it the automation. Executives called it the back-end stuff, which told you everything about how they thought it worked and nothing about what would happen when it stopped. POE was not a product we sold. It was the infrastructure we ran on. I built it over 7 years, in 3 major versions, with 2 dedicated engineers and a budget that was always slightly smaller than what I actually needed and slightly larger than what anyone else understood we were using. Version 1 handled invoicing. Before POE, accounts receivable at Paravex was a monthly manual exercise. Someone pulled a report from the CRM, cross-referenced it with a contract management spreadsheet, created invoices in batches, sent them manually, and tracked payment status in yet another spreadsheet. For people, 3 days. Extraordinary amounts of error. I automated the entire cycle. POE read contract records from Ironclad, our contract lifecycle management platform, matched them to subscription records in Salesforce, generated invoice data, pushed it to Stripe for billing execution, logged payment confirmations, and triggered renewal alerts 90 days before expiration. The 4-person manual process became a background task that ran nightly at 11:45 p.m. without a single human watching it. Version 2 expanded into SLA monitoring and vendor management. POE began tracking client service level commitments, flagging at-risk accounts, triggering escalation notices to customer success, managing vendor contract renewals, and maintaining the approved contractor registry that legal required for compliance under 3 of our enterprise client agreements. Version 3 was the one that saved $220,000. I spent 8 months building a predictive churn model embedded inside POE's client health layer. It consumed product usage data, support ticket velocity, invoice payment timing, contract renewal signals, and CSM note sentiment. It flagged accounts whose behavioral patterns matched historical pre-churn profiles. I presented it to the revenue leadership team in January, 2 months before Connor's Slack message. They tested it against our book of business in February. By March, customer success had used the flags to proactively engage 6 at-risk accounts representing $220,000 in annual contract value. The company held a brief all-hands shout-out about it. That was on the Thursday. Connor fired me the Friday. The beautiful irony of that timing did not escape me. But I want to be honest. I was not entirely surprised. I had watched Connor's orbit for 11 weeks and I understood exactly what I was to him. Evidence that he was not the smartest person in the room. That is always the most dangerous thing you can be. The engine ran on 3 critical third-party integrations. Ironclad for contract data, Salesforce for CRM and subscription records, Stripe for billing execution. Every night, POE authenticated into each platform, pulled the data it needed, processed it, and wrote outputs to our internal database. Every alert, renewal trigger, invoice, churn flag, vendor notice, SLA escalation, and compliance flag depended on those 3 API connections staying alive. API connections do not just stay alive through good intentions. They stay alive through OAuth tokens, developer credentials, and application-level authentication registered under a named developer account on each platform. I had registered all 3. This was not an accident or an oversight. It was policy. My policy. I had written Paravex's vendor integration governance framework in year 3, when our IT audit firm flagged that nobody owned API credential accountability at the organizational level. The policy I wrote designated a named integration custodian for each third-party developer environment. The integration custodian was the person responsible for credential security, token rotation, platform-level audit compliance, and access control management. For Ironclad, Salesforce, and Stripe, the integration custodian was me. My developer accounts on those 3 platforms held the registered application credentials for POE's authentication, not Paravex's generic IT admin account, which had been locked after a phishing incident in 2021 and never properly restored. Not a shared operations login. My named developer accounts registered under my professional email with my identity verification and, in 2 cases, my personal phone number for MFA backup. I had flagged this as an operational risk exactly once. In a written systems risk memo to Connor's predecessor in year 7, I noted that integration credential dependency on a single named custodian without a documented succession path was a medium-term continuity risk. I recommended adding a secondary custodian and running an organizational credential migration. Nobody acted on it. It stayed in the risk register under deferred. That word. Deferred. Companies love that word the way rivers love a convenient canyon. It sounds like a plan. It is actually a cliff. The standard offboarding policy at Paravex required departing employees to complete an account deactivation checklist. Deactivate SSO. Revoke internal system access. Disable company email. Complete knowledge transfer. Submit exit documentation. Sign off on any open items. The policy said nothing about developer account deactivation at third-party platforms because that was covered under the integration custodian transition procedure I had also written. And the integration custodian transition procedure said that before a custodian could formally transfer credentials, a qualified successor had to be designated, trained, and validated through a platform-level access handover. Estimated minimum time, 3 weeks per platform. Connor had given me a same-day exit. He thought systems ran on Slack messages. What he didn't know is they ran on tokens with names attached. At 5:04 p.m., I received the formal HR email. 2 attachments. Separation agreement. Final paycheck notice. I forwarded both to my attorney, Renee Chow, who specialized in employment and technology IP matters and had the calm, methodical energy of someone who had seen corporate confidence meet its own paperwork many times before. At 5:22 p.m., I opened the Paravex offboarding checklist in our internal portal. I completed every item that was required of me. SSO deactivation. Confirmed. Internal system access revoke request. Submitted. Company email forwarding. Set to expire in 24 hours per policy. Outstanding project documentation. Uploaded. Knowledge transfer acknowledgement. Flagged as incomplete due to same-day exit timeline. At the bottom of the checklist was a section labeled Third-Party Platform Credentials and Integration Custodian Status. This section required either a completed custodian transfer or a custodian transfer pending notation with a named successor and timeline. I selected custodian transfer pending. Successor, not yet designated. Timeline, per integration governance policy section 4.2, minimum 3 weeks per platform. I submitted the checklist at 5:31 p.m. Then I sent a formal email to Connor, copied to HR, legal, and the CTO, Delia Marsh, noting that my integration custodian responsibilities for Ironclad, Salesforce, and Stripe remained active under policy pending formal successor designation, and that the integration governance policy required a minimum transition window to protect operational continuity. I used the word required 3 times. I attached the policy document. I signed the email and sent it at 5:39 p.m. Nobody from the company replied that evening. At 7:15, I closed my laptop, leashed my dog Persimmon, and walked 40 minutes through my neighborhood while the city did its Friday evening unwinding around me. Barbecue smoke from 2 blocks over. Neighbor kids on bikes. Quiet orange lights softening the sidewalks. I bought ice cream on the way back from a shop with a handwritten menu board and sat on my back porch while Persimmon investigated the yard with her usual professional intensity. Renee texted around 8:30. Got your forward. Their exit timeline violated their own integration governance protocol. Don't touch the credentials yet. Let them ask. I replied, I was planning to let the policy do the asking for me. She replied with one word, good. I watched half a movie, fed Persimmon, showered, and slept at 10:45 p.m. The alert started at 11:46 p.m. That was when POE ran its nightly cycle. The first failure was silent because automation failures almost always are at first. No alarm, no call, no flashing warning. Just a process that started, hit an authentication wall, and wrote an error code to a log file that nobody was watching at midnight on a Friday. Specifically, the OAuth token for the Ironclad integration had expired 4 minutes before the scheduled cycle. Developer tokens on Ironclad refresh through a user-authorized reauthentication. If the authorizing user deactivates their company SSO, the token refresh chain breaks at the first automatic rotation. My SSO had deactivated at 5:04 p.m. The token held through its 6-hour grace window. Then it expired. POE attempted to pull contract records from Ironclad. The request returned HTTP 401. Authorization required. No valid credentials. Connection refused. The contract data pull failed. Because the contract data pull failed, the invoice generation cycle had no source material for 34 accounts due for billing runs that weekend. No contract data. No invoices generated. No invoices generated meant no billing push to Stripe. No billing push meant no charges going out to clients Monday morning. The cycle completed in 12 minutes instead of its usual 47. Short completions are not always good. In systems architecture, a suspiciously fast cycle usually means something stopped early. The log sat there, full of errors, under no one's responsibility. Saturday morning, the first human noticed. That was Marcus Tate, a customer success operations analyst who had been at Paravex for 3 years and was in the habit of checking system health dashboards on weekend mornings because he had once missed a Saturday alert that turned into a Monday client crisis and refused to let it happen again. Marcus was not on my team anymore. He had reported to me 2 years earlier, then moved to CS operations. He kept the habit because he kept his standards. At 8:17 a.m., he pinged the CS operations Slack channel. P overnight cycle shows 34 billing runs failed. No invoice output. Stripe integration returning connection error. He tagged the operations lead, who tagged IT, who escalated to Connor's VP of Engineering direct report, a man named Alec Foyer who had joined 4 months ago and was still in the phase where he thought confidence was a substitute for familiarity. Alec looked at the error log at 9:04 a.m. He saw the 401 on the Ironclad connection and assumed it was a credential rotation issue. Routine. He tried to access the Ironclad developer console through the generic IT admin account. The generic IT admin account no longer had application-level authority over POE's registered integration. It had never been migrated. Alec tried again with a secondary IT service account. Same result. He called the Ironclad support line at 9:41 a.m. Ironclad support told him that the application credentials for PoE were registered under a named developer account and that changes to those credentials required either that account holder or a formal organizational transfer process through Ironclad's platform governance team. Estimated time for an organizational transfer request: 5 to 7 business days. Business days. On a Saturday, Alec pinged Connor at 9:52 a.m. Connor responded at 10:08 a.m. This is a credential ownership issue. Can we just create a new integration? Alec looked at that question for several seconds. Then he explained that creating a new Ironclad integration required a new application registration, a new OAuth flow, an update to PoE's configuration files, and a validation run to confirm the new connection was pulling correct contract data. That required someone who understood PoE's internal architecture, the Ironclad contract data schema, and the field mappings we used for invoice generation. Connor responded, "Who knows that stuff?" Alec responded, "Margot built it." Connor responded, "Right. Okay, let's look at our options." There were no other options. That was stage 1. Stage 2 arrived Sunday afternoon when the Stripe integration broke. Not immediately. Stripe's connection to PoE used a separate OAuth path registered under my developer account. That path had been operating on a different token rotation schedule, and the token had not been due for rotation until the following Monday. But on Sunday, Alec attempted to manually push a batch filling run to Stripe to cover the Friday failures. He accessed the Stripe developer environment through Paravex's primary company account and discovered that PD's Stripe integration was a separate registered application under my personal Stripe developer profile, not the company's main account. He tried to transfer the application to the company account. Stripe's integration transfer process required confirmation from the current account owner. The current account owner was me. He did not contact me directly. Apparently, Connor had told him not to yet, which was a choice of the specific kind that feels like strategy and functions like a blindfold. Instead, Alec submitted a Stripe developer support ticket requesting a forced application transfer. Stripe responded Monday morning. Application ownership transfers require verification from the registered account holder. Forced transfers are not supported for security reasons. Please have the current account holder initiate the transfer. There was a pause in the log record of about 40 minutes after that response arrived. I imagine Alex sat with it for a while. Then he called IT to ask if the company had any legal mechanism to compel a credential transfer from a former employee. IT called legal. Legal called HR. HR read the integration governance policy for the first time on a Monday. They found Section 4.2 very interesting. Connor's first voicemail arrived at 11:23 a.m. Monday morning. "Hey Margot, this is Connor. Look, there's a technical situation with some of the integrations, and I think you mentioned this in an email. If you have a few minutes to jump on a call, that would be really helpful. Thanks." A technical situation. Like weather. Like something that happened to him from outside rather than a consequence he built with his own words on a Friday at 4:47 p.m. I listened to the voicemail from the patio chair where I was working on a consulting proposal for a former client contact who had reached out over the weekend. Persimmon was sleeping in a patch of sun nearby. The jasmine on my back fence smelled like everything was fine. I forwarded the voicemail to Renee. She responded, "Don't call back yet." I did not call back yet. Stage 3 hit Monday afternoon when 34 clients did not receive invoices they were expecting. Paravex's billing cycle ran on the 1st and 15th of each month. The 15th fell on a Saturday, which meant Monday was the first business day those clients were checking their accounts for charges. When the charges were absent, 12 of them contacted their account managers asking whether there was a billing issue. Account managers escalated to CS operations. CS operations escalated to billing. Billing escalated to finance. Finance called Alec. Alec sent Connor a message that said, "We have 34 accounts with missed billing runs. Estimated total, $612,000 in delayed charges this cycle. Need resolution before end of week to avoid payment processing complications. $612,000. In one cycle." for 34 accounts. Not lost. Delayed. But delayed billing creates late payment cascades, accounts payable confusion, and, in some enterprise client cases, triggers financial exception reviews that are genuinely unpleasant. Connor called the CTO, Delia Marsh, at 2:14 p.m. Delia Marsh was 51, had been CTO since year 4, and had the kind of measured professionalism that people sometimes mistake for approachability until they learn she had once fired a VP of engineering for misrepresenting a system migration timeline. She had been on vacation when Connor fired me. She had returned Monday morning to a building full of errors and a VP who had sent a chat message instead of having a conversation. I know from a mutual colleague who was in the room that Delia's first words when Alec explained the credential situation were, "When was the integration custodian policy last reviewed?" Alec said, "Margot wrote it in year 3. Delia said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "And Connor fired her on a Friday." Alec confirmed that. Delia's second statement, according to the same colleague, was, "Get me Renee Chow's number." That told me Delia already knew. By 5:30 p.m. Monday, Connor had called me 4 times and texted twice. "Hey, let me know when you're free to chat." This is pretty urgent, actually. I had not called back. Tuesday morning, the Salesforce integration broke. This one was not a token failure. It was a permission cascade. PO used a Salesforce connected app that I had configured and registered under my Salesforce developer profile. When my company SSO deactivated, the connected app lost its profile-level permission grant. It continued operating through a session-level cache for 72 hours, then the permission tree expired on Tuesday at 6:11 a.m. Without the Salesforce integration, POE lost access to subscription status data. It could no longer match active subscribers to contract records. It could no longer determine which accounts were in renewal windows. It could no longer feed the churn risk layer. The churn prediction model went dark. And then something quieter and worse happened. The 6 at-risk accounts that customer success had been monitoring using POE's flags stopped updating. The system stopped generating new health signals. CS managers opened their dashboards Tuesday morning and found stale data across their entire book of at-risk accounts. 2 of those accounts had been in active renewal conversations. They went cold. Not because the clients left. Because CS stopped having information about what was happening and their outreach stalled without real-time data to drive it. That was when Marcus Tate sent me a direct message. Not to ask me to fix it. He was too careful for that. Just 3 words. The flags died. I replied, "I know." He replied, "I figured." Then, the account we were closest on just went to competitor evaluation. That was an account worth $38,000 annually. It had not left yet. But it was looking. Tuesday afternoon, 7 people had called or messaged me. Connor, 4 calls, 3 messages. Alec, 2 calls. Someone from HR whose name I did not recognize, 1 call. Marcus, 2 messages. Delia Marsh, 0 calls. That last one told me Delia was doing this correctly. At 4:02 p.m., Renee called me. "They've read the policy," she said. And? Delia wants a meeting. Formal channel. Wednesday. On whose terms? On ours, if we want them. We want them. Good. I'll confirm for 10 a.m. I said, "What's Connor's posture?" Renee said, "He told HR the credential situation was an oversight on her part." That was about right. I said, "That should be a fascinating position to maintain." Renee almost laughed. Wednesday morning, I wore navy slacks and my favorite gray blazer and drove to a law office meeting room that smelled like fresh coffee and old carpet. Renee was already there when I arrived, with 2 printed folders and 1 legal pad. On the other side of the table sat Delia Marsh, Paravex's outside counsel Mark Edelstein, and a quiet HR director named Petra Volkov who took notes with the speed and accuracy of someone trained by a stenography program to hate ambiguity. Connor was at the far end of the table in his Patagonia vest, laptop open, like the meeting was something he could multitask. He was not multitasking well. He looked like a man who had made a very crisp decision on Friday and spent the weekend discovering that decisions have technical dependencies. Delia opened. "Margot, thank you for coming." I want to say directly that the manner of your separation was handled poorly. I nodded. She said, we have a platform continuity situation that I'd like to understand and resolve. Mark Edelstein cleared his throat in the way lawyers clear their throats when they are about to say something important without appearing to threaten anyone. Our position is that the integration credentials are company assets and should be transferred as part of the offboarding. Renee said, our position is that Paravex's own integration governance policy requires a 3-week minimum transition window, a designated successor, and custodian-to-custodian validation. The company executed a same-day departure without following its own protocol. Mark said, we'd characterize that as an implementation oversight. Renee said, the policy does not have a paragraph about oversights. Delia looked at Connor. Connor said, I was not aware the credentials were registered under her personal accounts. That sentence lived in the room for a moment. Delia said, you received an email on Friday at 5:39 p.m. explaining exactly that. Connor said, I was in a meeting. Petra wrote something down. Delia turned back to me. Margot, what would restoration look like? I opened my folder. I can transfer credentials for all 3 platforms and complete a structured custodian handover, I said. Under certain conditions. Connor shifted in his chair. We're not here to negotiate. The credentials are legally ours. I looked at him. He had the confident posture of someone who believed he was still in the same position he had been on Friday afternoon. He was not. Mark, Renee said, your client's developer accounts are in an organizational name. These developer accounts are in Ms. Ellison's personal name, governed by your own integration custodian policy, which your client authored and signed off on, which requires a transition procedure that your client bypassed. If you'd like to argue otherwise, we have 7 business days before the next billing cycle. You may prefer to use that time differently. A pause. Long enough to matter. Delia said, Margot. Your conditions. I took a breath. Not for effect. Just to make sure I said it precisely. I will not return as an employee under Connor Vale's authority or reporting structure. Connor said, that's not. Delia held up a hand. I continued. I will accept a principal consulting engagement, 6 months, reporting directly to the CTO. Fixed fee of $28,000 per month. Scope limited to POE architecture, integration governance, and successor qualification. That was $168,000 for 6 months. My annual salary had been $195,000. Second, I said. POE's documentation, integration architecture, and all associated design records are confirmed as my work product for portfolio purposes. Written acknowledgement from Paravex in the consulting agreement. Third, the 3-person core POE team, Marcus Tate, Elena Sue, and Devon Park, are restored to systems architecture reporting with immediate effect and a 15% compensation adjustment. Fourth, a written acknowledgement from Paravex that the integration continuity disruption resulted from a policy violation in the offboarding process and not from any misconduct or negligence on my part. Connor said, she is not getting a written acknowledgement. Delia said, Connor. He stopped. Delia looked at Mark. Mark looked at Renee. Then Delia looked at me. The acknowledgement, she said. Language to be agreed between counsel? Yes. The team restoration? Yes. The consulting fee? She paused. $22,000 per month. Renee looked at me. I said, 26. Delia said, 24. I looked at her. She was fair. She always had been. 24, I said. With a $30,000 integration completion bonus upon full successor qualification across all 3 platforms. Delia nodded once. Connor said, this is completely unreasonable. Delia said, Connor, your decision created this outcome. Please let me resolve it. He stared at the table like it had personally disappointed him. Petra had not stopped writing since minute 3 of the meeting. I began credential transfer the following Monday. Not as an employee. As a consultant with a signed agreement, a project scope, and absolutely no ambiguity about who owned the architecture we were both looking at. The ironclad transfer took 11 days. I trained a new named custodian, an infrastructure engineer named Theo Barat, through 3 full system walkthroughs. I documented the integration logic in the most thorough onboarding guide I had ever written, which was partly professional and partly the particular satisfaction of making a body of work so visible that no one could pretend it was simple again. The Salesforce transfer took 8 days, including a full connected app rebuild under organizational credentials and a 2-cycle validation run to confirm the subscription matching logic was accurate. The Stripe transfer took 6 days and required a coordination call with Stripe's enterprise support team because the billing configuration had 14 custom metadata fields that the new custodian needed to understand before he touched anything. By the end of week 4, the 34 delayed billing accounts were resolved. 31 were invoiced and collected without further issue. 2 required manual intervention because the delays had triggered exception reviews in their AP departments. 1 required a discount negotiation after their finance team flagged the gap as a vendor reliability concern. That last one cost Paravex $8,200 in credits. The broader damage was harder to contain. The churn prediction model had been dark for 9 days. During that window, 2 of the 6 at-risk accounts moved meaningfully toward churn. 1 left during my consulting engagement. The other renewed, but at a lower contract tier, a $31,000 annual reduction. The account that had gone to competitor evaluation during the Salesforce outage signed with the competitor. $38,000 gone. Not negotiable. Total revenue impact from the 9-day system disruption, $218,400. That number lands a particular way. They fired me the day after I saved $220,000. Then their decision cost them $218,400. The margin between those two figures is $1,600. I found that deeply, structurally satisfying. Connor lasted 6 more months at Paravex. He did not leave dramatically. He was quietly moved out of the technology operations seat into a strategic transformation advisory role that had no direct reports and no operational authority, which is the executive equivalent of being handed a clipboard in a room with no doors. Then he was gone. LinkedIn announced he was exploring new opportunities, which is correct in the same way a car wreck is technically an unplanned stop. Alec Foyer stayed and, to his credit, learned from the experience with enough humility to become useful. He asked me 3 technical questions during my consulting engagement that were actually good questions. That kind of growth deserves acknowledgement, even from me. The acknowledgement letter arrived from Paravex's counsel in week 5 of my engagement. 1 page. Clear language. The integration continuity disruption arose from a procedurally non-compliant separation that did not follow the integration governance policy. Ms. Ellison's performance throughout her tenure and during the consulting transition was consistent with the highest professional standards. No employee misconduct. Renee read it and called me. "It's clean," she said. "Yes. They wrote it themselves." "I know. That means they felt it." I folded the letter into the accordion file where I keep documents worth keeping. Marcus, Elena, and Devin were restored to the architecture team with their raises effective the 1st of the month. Marcus texted me when the correction hit his paycheck. Long overdue, but still. I replied, "You never stopped working like it was already true." He sent back a thumbs up. Best kind of person. My consulting engagement ended in month 6 as agreed. The total paid $174,000 in monthly fees plus the $30,000 completion bonus. Grand total from Paravex after the Slack message that was supposed to end my tenure there, $204,000. In a 6-month consulting window. More than my previous annual salary. For completing the transition that their Friday decision made necessary. The math is not poetic. It is just accurate. After the engagement, I set up a small architecture practice with a partner I trusted. We worked with 4 clients in the first year. All of them were mid-market software companies that had automation systems held together by 1 or 2 people nobody had ever bothered to document. We went in, mapped it, and helped them build governance structures that would survive whoever left next. Boring work. Structural work. The best kind. I kept persimmon. Bought a slightly better desk chair. Started cooking more on Sunday evenings with enough ambition to be relaxing and not so much as to be work. My sister visited in June and said my place felt calmer than it had in years. I told her it usually does when you stop carrying other people's organizational debt. She did not fully understand that sentence. That was fine. About 8 months after the consulting engagement ended, a newsletter I followed called Architecture Weekly ran a short profile on automation governance failure patterns in mid-market SaaS. The author had spoken to 12 anonymous executives across the sector. One case study described a company that had experienced a multi-platform authentication cascade following an unplanned departure. That resulted in a billing disruption affecting $612,000 in a single cycle and a churn prediction system failure lasting 9 days. No names. But the details were very specific. The author wrote, "Companies frequently treat their automation architects as operational staff rather than infrastructure owners. The distinction matters enormously when governance fails." I forwarded the article to Renee with no message. She replied, "Told you written consequences are more durable." Then, the same week, LinkedIn notified me that Connor Vale had viewed my profile. The notification sat there for a moment. I clicked past it and went back to the proposal I was writing for a new client. Water treatment company in Denver. They had a compliance monitoring system built by one person who was planning to retire. Nobody had documentation. Nobody had succession plans. They needed the kind of help I was now very good at providing. Because here is what all of these stories have in common, and I mean every single one of them. Every person who has ever been let go by chat message or calendar invite or the coward's version of a phone call where the phone stays in someone else's pocket. The companies that treat people as replaceable usually discover they were wrong about which ones. Not all of them. That part is important. Some of them, maybe most of them, really do find someone else to do the work and nobody notices the difference. But the ones who built something? The ones who wrote the policy and the architecture and the system that runs at 11:45 p.m. while everyone else is asleep? Those companies discover what replacement actually costs when the next billing cycle arrives and nothing moves and nobody can answer the question they should have asked before Friday. They thought I was a line on a payroll spreadsheet. What they didn't know was I was the reason the spreadsheet had numbers in it. A Slack message was how they said goodbye. $24,000 a month was how they said please come back. I preferred the second sentence. Not because of the money, though the money was correct. Because when Delia Marsh looked at Connor Vale in that conference room and said, "Your decision created this outcome," I heard something I had not heard in 9 years at that company. The truth from a table where truth usually arrived 3 weeks late and 14 meetings behind the facts. That was worth a Friday afternoon sandwich and a patient weekend and one very thoroughly completed offboarding checklist. If this one sat with you, if you've ever been let go by someone who didn't understand what you actually did and then found out the hard way, like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments whether they ever came back or whether you watched it from a distance. And if you built something at a company that treated it like furniture, I would genuinely love to hear what it was. As for me, I kept the documentation, the governance policy, and the client. They kept the regret and a very thorough newsletter mention. I think we both got what we built.